program. Every time we do it, it invokes a really special moment. It has a different story to it. But let me tell you a couple of things first. Welcome to the Spelman College Museum of Fine Art. We are just so honored to have this particular community conversation because it's so in line with the mission of this institution. And as being the only museum in the nation that focuses on art by and about the African diaspora. My name is Nicole Hill, and I'm the curator of education. And when we developed the Community Conversations program, it was an opportunity to bring members of our community, which include students, faculty, staff members, and people that are friends of the museum, to connect their passions with what is on view in the museum. So when we first found out that Renee Style Tells the Conjurer was going to be the exhibition that was going to make its way into this space in the spring semester, I immediately said, Nicole Smith, please bless this space. And Nicole has just been an amazing person to interact with on a daily basis, being on the fourth floor. But when I started to learn more about her interests in science fiction and fantasy, and also as a writer, it just made a really wonderful parallel intersection to a work that evokes alter egos, mythology, as well as biographical information. So I don't want to talk too much about what she's going to be speaking on. I'd just rather turn it over to her. Thank you so much, Nicole, and we look forward to hearing what you will share with us.
As Nicole said, I'm Nicole Smith, and I'm currently a doctoral student at Georgia State University. My primary area of study is American literature, and then my secondary is rhetoric and composition. What I'm interested in is how Black women who write speculative fiction use it to reimagine their identity in the face of racial and gender oppression. I'm also interested in how to translate this interest into the digital composition classroom. So today I want to discuss two related concepts. First, this concept of a reimagined identity for Black women in the context of Audre Lorde's term biomythology. And secondly, one way to apply this concept in the composition classroom. So, I'm a Whovian. I like to watch Dr. Who.
Yes.
And so, I'm a newcomer to the season when it rebooted in the 2000s. I'm not an old school fan from 1950, whenever. And I was so excited when he had the first Black companion in 50 years. This is big, okay? Doctor Who is an alien Time Lord, who he's the last one of his race. He's made it his mission to be kind of like the police for the universe, and he tries to make sure that aliens don't destroy the universe, and especially his favorite planet, Earth. Martha Jones, who is the first companion that is Black, a Black woman. She's the first companion that's actually a doctor, a trained doctor. She became his companion because Doctor Who needs companions so that he doesn't get out of control. He needs somebody to say, hey, slow it down, right? So I was very excited until I saw this one episode where Doctor Who is, again, I say the Earth, and Martha Jones, his companion, he has to go undercover as a human, as a real human. So he gives her his Doctor Who essence. So while he's undercover as a human, she goes undercover as a maid. And this, while she's undercover as a maid, I was like, okay. I didn't think I would see this in 2013. Certainly not on a sci-fi show, but okay. But then this white woman walks into the room and says to her, and you, who are you supposed to be? Well, I was just living. I think I called my friend in LA and we had like a 2-hour conversation about why this is the hugest problem ever. And it also made me think about, the importance of, and I want you to see this image, the importance of Black women writing their own Black speculative stories. Not only that, but it's also important to seek out and it's also important to identify an academic paradigm in which to discuss their work and to emphasize the importance of Black women writing stories that remind us who we are, that remind us that who we are or can become is based on our history, experience, and imagination. It's not necessarily just locked into a race and gender oppression context. So, I'll tell you a little bit about speculative fiction. It's an umbrella term that encompasses science fiction, fantasy, horror, and science fantasy genres. Black speculative fiction encompasses these same genres, but with the Black or African diasporic focus. How this focus manifests is varied in character and or setting or plot. Speculative fiction allows one to ask, what if, why not, or to claim, it didn't happen that way, it happened this way. Or simply to push the envelope. In other words, it allows Black women to vastly explore ways of being and existing within or outside of linear time, within or outside of the known universe. So I'm proposing that we should look at Black literature written by Black speculative literature written by women. I'm proposing that we should look at it through the lens of Audre Lorde's term biomythology. Audre Lorde she was a feminist, a poet, a scholar, a lesbian. And I say all of these terms because this is how she would describe herself. She wouldn't lock herself into one name. She would say, I'm just a scholar, right? And so these list of attributes is just the tip of the iceberg of how she began to define herself. We see this open up in the title of her book, Zami, which is a nod to her Curacao heritage. Zami, a new spelling of my name. Zami means women who work and love together. So claiming Zami as her new name means that she's plugging herself into a larger and wider community that she is a part of, that she claims, and that is a part of her. So with this big re-identification of herself, right, we get a little window into what she's going to do in her book, Zami. The actual story she shares in the book about her life is a biomythography, which is a story combined with myth to emphasize aspects of the story that has impacted the writer. So here's an example of that. This is how she describes her first menstruation cycle. And this is on page 78 of Zami, her book Zami. As I continue to pound the spice, a vital connection seemed to establish itself between the muscles of my fingers, curved tightly around the smooth pestle in its insistent downward motion, and the molten core of my body, whose source emanated from a new ripe fullness just below the pit of my stomach. The thread ran over my ribs and along my spine, tingling and singing into a basin that was poised between my hips. And within that basin was a tidy ocean of blood, beginning to be made real and available to me for strength and information. So she didn't just get her period. That opened up a window for her to be connected to womanhood. And by describing this occurrence in this way, we understand the fullness of the experience and how it connects her to herself, to other women, and to the world. Okay. So the elements of mythos interwoven in this account displays a young woman who is beginning to connect with the onset of adult womanhood. This is very similar to what Renee Stout does in this exhibition, right? She takes on the persona of Fatima Mayfield, a mythical hoodoo woman, in order to more easily explore ideas and concepts. So that's why Makiba graciously asked me to present, because she saw a connection between those two concepts. So in this light, biomythology to read Black speculative fiction read by women. Now this all sounds great and fancy, but how does it work in practice? I want to talk about it in the context of Kindred, and I want to talk about it in the context of Beloved. So let's take Octavia Butler's novel Kindred. The speculative fiction trope of time travel and the framework of the neo-slave narrative present a biomythology of Black women's evolution from slavery in the southern United States to 20th century descendants of slaves. Kindred's protagonist, Dana, offers a first-person account of the main character's evolution via time travel from a Black woman who solely defines herself based on her 20th century experiences to a Black woman whose identity is based on her ancestral heritage. Her account includes her emotional and physical journey from railing against slavery, accepting slavery, and then returning to a rejection of bondage. When we read this as a biomythology, it's not just one woman's story. It becomes representative of Black women's experience in our ancestors with slavery. Let's take another example of how we can apply biomythology in Black women's speculative fiction. And it's a literal retelling of biomythology of Margaret Garner, a runaway slave woman who in the late 1850s tried to kill her 4 children rather than see them enslaved again. She only succeeded in killing one. Unfortunately, she was enslaved again and died 2 years later of a severe fever. Toni Morrison's biomythology of Garner's life, the novel Beloved, asks, what if Garner were able to experience a long life of freedom? And what if the daughter she killed returned as a ghost? How would Garner's life be affected? How would this fierce mother's love engage her ghost daughter and living daughter? These questions allow the reader to view Margaret Garner as a whole person, not just an 1800s news story, and to weigh the travesty of slavery against the mother's love. Just as the mythos element provides a wider and deeper meaning and universal connectivity to a biological occurrence with Audre Lorde's story, it provides a wider and deeper exploration of Garner's actions, what drove her to it, and how she may have been affected. Viewing these 2 novels through a theoretical lens that does not consider the history of Black women in the United States or the mythos elements contained in the text dulls the comprehension of the historical traumas that the text explores. So the term biomythology, as I use it, is a compelling lens through which to view Black women's experiences with race and gender oppressions. At the same time, there's a wider use for the term in the composition classroom. I've had the pleasure on 2 occasions of teaching biomythology writing workshops as a section during the Tony K. Bombard Scholar and Activism Conference. This experience taught me that creating a biomythology can also become a localized source of activism. It allows you to, as Laura did, explore traumas, social concerns, and/or personal or community experiences. When I teach this, though, I encourage participants to reimagine themselves as other creatures from other worlds, or to use cultural specific beings. The more extravagant the world, the more removed one is from the event, and thus the deeper they can explore the issue they have chosen. Because the conversation in rhetoric and composition, in the rhetoric and composition field over the past few years has been that composition doesn't have to just be an alphabetic composition. It could be an audio composition. It could be a digital composition. I decided to test this on myself in a program that I participated in 2 years ago. It's called the Digital and Media Composition Institute. And I was able to work under the tutelage of Cynthia Self and Richard Self, who are important names in rhetoric and composition. And so I decided to, after a steep learning curve with Adobe Photoshop and Comic Life, I decided to tell a story of something that happened to me that I wanted to explore a little further. When I was 8 and my mother was 31, my mother had an aneurysm that resulted in a disabling stroke. And so what that meant for us that my grandmother came and picked us up from Atlanta and moved us to South Carolina. So as you can imagine, it had a large impact on our family. But as Octavia Butler writes in her Earth Seed series, we can shape change or allow it to shape us. So as an adult, I understand the blessing of my grandmother, the gravity of the labors of love she took on, and her shared perspective of excavating the joy out of this brand new change. For instance, my mother, when she first experienced her stroke, couldn't talk. So anytime she would say a word, my grandmother and I would dance this jig in the hospital. And so that leads to why I have chosen these colors. When I teach this as a writing exercise, I encourage students to think about the colors they're using and the picture they're going to use in the motif. I chose a fairy motif because with three women in the house, there's a strong feminine energy. And so this is a picture of my grandmother, my mother, and me. And I've given them, I decided to represent the fairy motif with butterfly wings and forests. And so, and then I also decided to tell it kind of in an old English kind of style, and that's just a personal preference. And I called it the Metamorphosis Chronicle in order to symbolize that it wasn't something that was devastating, it was just a huge change, right? So the picture, so if you can't see it, I can read it to you. It says, a long, long time ago, this is me in sunglasses. An elder maiden was born. The elders named her Rose. My first name is Rosalind, which is Latin for rose. The elder mother and mother hoped this name would protect her from the prophecy big change that will alter the young elf's life forever. So the biggest challenge I had with composing this was deciding what to call the aneurysm. And so I decided to call it the big change and represent it in a color that was rich, but if you can see close up, this butterfly, the pattern is very blurred. So, all was well in the elven kingdom until the big change ripped the wings from the mother elf. For a few years, the kingdom was dark. And then this is my grandmother and I, with my little plaque she always put in my head. Like her namesake, Rose proved to be hardy and began to flourish in a new kingdom, that of an older mother. I was conscious of choosing a background. This is more like a wildflower background than this forest background, which is a little bit more, has a little bit more constance in it. So, and then, this is a very short story. Indeed, although the elder mother's kingdom was different, it was filled with just as much love and nurturing as Rose experienced in her own kingdom. And so I took a picture of me in DragonCon. Dressed I
appreciate it so much.
Yeah. At DragonCon, you can just take random pictures of random people. There was no way I could find these guys, my knights, and get their names. So I obscured their faces with these hearts. So Rose learned to live well and found that all was different but wonderful in her new home. So this is my story. So when we talk about biomythology and we talk about Black speculative fiction and how to talk about important events that have happened, whether personally or whether in a racialized and gender context, I think, biomythology allows us to answer the question, who are Black women supposed to be, whoever we imagine ourselves to be. Thank you.
Thank you, Nicole.
Thank you.
And on behalf of the Southern Housing and Fine Art, I would like to give you this token of appreciation.
Thank you.
And we just want to open it up for people who have questions or want to have a further dialogue about what was just shown and explained. So I'll just create that space.
So any questions? Take me first.
As an artist, I'm very aware that healing projects that come with expressing yourself through work, and despite the seasonal what emotional responses did you have to create this story?
I think for the first time, it allowed me to, or it made me really, really consider what I thought about what happened. I was 8 when it happened, and so I just kind of, went with what the adults were planning. So my mom's friends would come and show me how to, crochet and do little things to keep my mind off of it, but I never really sat down and considered what I thought about it. And so what I thought about it after, when I was looking at this, like, you know what? This was a terrible thing that happened, but some really beautiful things came out of it. And so it did allow me to heal, in the sense that it allowed me to access it in a distanced way and decide what I thought about it for myself as opposed to, considering what other people may think about it. So,
Well, it's beautiful.
thank you. Yes, ma'am.
It's kind of like a cleansing, doing
Yes.
that type of thing for your spirit.
And it was because when I looked at the pictures that I was choosing, I was a little sassy little girl. So I had my little elephant shades on and my Sesame Street purse. and I could access memories because my grandmother made me in a pageant. So this is the dress that she sewed for me, so I could access memories, the good memories that were a part of what happened. Yes, sir.
How did Dr. Wu's companion answer that question?
I think she answered somewhere along the line, if I remember correctly, there may be Huvians correct me, but I think she answered along the lines of, I'm the maid. But my mouth was like, no, you're not. Yeah.
What time period are they currently in?
I think it was a period episode.
Right.
So I want to say maybe it was like, I'm going to take a guess, like 18th century maybe.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's just like African women. Martha's like so strong-willed.
Yes.
I think I missed that episode. So like when you said that, I was like, really? Martha?
I mean, and when she first came onto the series, I was like, how are we gonna do this? And then, and I think the first episode they met Shakespeare and they said, oh, you're a Blackamoor, and so I was like, well, okay, I can do with the Blackamoor, because it was still in a respectful, equal on an equal footing conversation. But when we moved into her being the maid, I was like, okay. So,
Put all this together, maybe working on it. I mean, if someone wanted to say, they can try like this for themselves for something. Is it a time limit involved? Is it something you need to stick to that? Because sometimes when you dig in real deep, it's very painful being a writer. You have to step away from that and come back. But this is awesome. I mean, it seems in its simplicity, but the depth of it is like,
I practice on myself because I'll ask myself, when I teach this in the classroom, what steps will the students need to take? So that's why I want to practice on myself. And so I was fortunate during the program to have this was all I had to do. So I could do it in about 3 or 4 days. And I have developed this habit when I'm working on something, even if it's something that's close to my heart, I can put my scholar face on and just, finish it. So, but if I were teaching this in the classroom, I think I would probably give myself about 4 weeks. Because the students have to learn about Adobe Photoshop. They have to figure out, it's just like writing a paper. You have to figure out what your thesis is going to be, your thesis statement. You have to have an outline to figure out, what you want to address and how. And then I had several drafts. I have like 2 drafts of this where I drew the stick figures. So I had a first draft, a second draft, I had revisions. So it's the same as writing an alphabetic paper. So I would give about maybe 4 or 5 weeks to do this. I think you have to develop a class with the mindset that this is how you're going to teach composition. Any other questions? Yes, Kelly.
Hi, I'm a student at Spelman, a junior in the Audrey Lord Seminar. I just wanted to first say I really enjoyed the presentation, and it speaks a lot to what we've been discussing in class. And my specific research is on Audre Lorde's self-discovery, her journey to self-discovery and connecting with the woman that she is in every aspect and embracing each realm in which she kind of exists in the world. And so this presentation definitely aligned with that. And I'm also looking at how Audre Lorde was this woman who seemed to just be so self-connected, and in that she inspires so many black women, and how just reading her stuff has really inspired my own self-journey as well. So I was just wondering if you could speak to like Audre Lorde's impact possibly, if any, like on her self-journey and self-discovery, if it had any type of impact or parallels with your own.
Yes, I was familiar with Audre Lorde for a while. And then I took a feminist theory course, and I read for the first time, I'm going to mess up the name of the article, Uses of the Erotic.
Yeah.
Did I say that right? Blew my mind. Blew my mind. I almost want to say it changed my life. Because, she talks in there, as you know, about the importance of finding out the essence of who you are and living in that. And so, in some ways it kind of gave me permission. Because I originally was going to be a Victorianist. But that's my other thing I love is Victorian stuff. But it kind of gave permission to kind of live in that zone, if you will, of, I'm watering it down totally, but, of who you are, and to live that and be that. And I also think that through reading the letter, some of the letters, I think there's a letter to, when she was, an essay she wrote when she was in Moscow, just so much of her writing is about fiercely being who she is. And not just in a segmented way, but as I said earlier, collaboratively. And I think anybody that, has the courage to write about that and do that, I take my hats off to them. And I see them as kind of a model of how to live. Yeah.
Can I ask a follow-up question?
Sure.
So, well, maybe this is more personal for me, but I'm a sociology and anthropology major, and so I always struggle with this idea because I definitely want to tell my story, and I think I do have a story to tell, as each of us does. But how do you balance, and maybe it depends on the field, but how do you kind of balance your own story and having the space as a scholar to tell that, and where does it become valid enough to be considered scholarship or just, your own voice that people really won't, I guess, look at as real scholarship?
Yeah, this is what I've learned. In my program, I'm one of maybe 3 people doing Black speculative fiction. I'm probably a handful of Black people in my program. And so when I say that I want to do Black speculative fiction, I get a few side eyes. And what I realize in retrospect is that me studying and working and reading Black speculative fiction is part of something I've always done.
Mm-hmm.
I've always watched, when I was younger, I watched Dungeons and Dragons, Visionaries. I always read the books about the elves, and it was a blessing that I was able to find a way to have this discussion. It's kind of like the stars were aligned, because I had a mentor who told me, just do you like Victorian stuff? Don't do that. Do what you like. And then right around that time, there was this surge in public conversations and studies about Black speculative fiction. And so I think that if you have a way, if there's a way of communicating your story that is natural to you, right? Like for Renee Stout, this is her way of communicating her story. Then you have to follow that line. And sometimes, the way a parent might not be obvious. Sometimes it may be charting that line, that path. But I think, it makes life feel a little bit better, a lot better, when you're doing something hard of your own accord. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Cool. Any other questions? Okay, yes.
So I love this idea, and I think it actually could go in conjunction with a research project, a research paper, something like that, to chart a student's journey in doing that. And I would love to develop an assignment, so I'm going to invite you to do a workshop or something for people who want to learn more about this.
No
I
problem.
would love to.
Yeah, I kind of, thank you so much. I've created a course around this, and in the course, students have to write reflections. So it's a part of, so I can definitely, thank you so much. Yes, ma'am.
So, what is the goal of Black speculative fiction? Is it more a personal thing, like something that's cathartic, and to really understand what like events that you went through in your life and how the change and effects it had on you, or is it something that could also be social, as in trying to move away from images of like the Black women we made?
I'm going to give you a nebulous answer, so I apologize in advance. I think the goal of Black speculative fiction is just to tell, to present to the world stories about fantasy and science and horror that are penned by Black people and that reflect Black people's experience. I can't speak to what the intentions are behind that, but I think, just the importance of having, ourselves represented in another genre. I think that's the overall purpose of it. But each author has different intentions.
What are you gonna ask?
Oh, yeah, I had a question. But I put it on Twitter because
Yeah, that's why I was like, I can ask it from Twitter, or so we have a question from Twitter
Okay.
that why do you think there is side-eye towards Black speculative fiction writers?
Why is there
Why do you think you've been getting side-eye?
because we don't write that. We don't write it. We don't read it. We don't watch it in movies. So why would we study it? Right? So it's a kind of I think misunderstanding and misunderstanding of, once again, when Jimi Hendrix was playing, they said Black people didn't play rock and roll, right? So again, it's another misunderstanding of what Black people do.
To follow up to that, do you think that's just like it's not like recently there's been a resurgence of Octavia Butler within the literary sphere, but I wouldn't say that's like a popular resurgence. So do you think that's just connected to it not being popular so much, Black speculative fiction not being in the mainstream?
I can't say for sure what's causing this surge of interest in Black speculative fiction. I can say that Octavia Butler was an important writer, an award-winning writer, and unfortunately, I think in our culture, we don't appreciate people until they pass away. And so I think that, that's probably a little bit of it. Can I answer you? Okay.
Is Black speculative fiction, or how is Black speculative fiction different from paranormal fiction?
My personal opinion? I think it's different. I think that Black speculative fiction, because, and I'm going to say from an African diaspora standpoint, concepts of ghosts and ancestors being around and active in our lives is, this is a part of the culture. It's not a separate instance. So, we're in Grandma's house and Grandma died 20 years ago, and we hear her, we hear a noise that she's always made. For us, that's normal. It's not paranormal. And so I think, that's another reason why it's important to talk about, the value of Black speculative fiction because, again, that's a part of that African diaspora culture, that we can then, insert into, fiction.
Oh, right. Do you watch Sleepy Hollow?
Yes.
Okay, that's my show.
Yes.
And
And I was excited about it.
I understand it has a diverse writing cast, my goodness. And you can tell from the trailer, contrasting what you said about what happened on Dr. Who, which is the first encounter between Nicholas Crane and his Black cohort. Nicole Kari's character was, I see you're emancipated.
Right.
Which is something they used in the commercial. And I thought, well, that's different. Sort of acknowledgement with the last time we saw Blacks able as slaves.
Right.
And really just to bring that out in the open in a really candid way, in a humorous way, throughout that pilot, told me that this was a different approach.
Yes,
And you can see the hand of people of color behind that show.
absolutely.
And on the screen.
Yeah, because there's always conversations about what I call the brown people were doing. You know, there's an episode with the Mohawk. The Mohawk, and it's just, I think it makes a difference, you know, unlike Doctor Who, when there's somebody in the room who can, you know, bring a cultural context, you know, to a character, to a concept. Yes, ma'am.
I really like the meaning that you applied to the butterfly. I have a butterfly tattooed on me as well, and so when I was listening to your story, I think I connected personally with it, and I think that it's great to look at hardships and obstacles in a more of a transformative way than, you know, some people don't look at what they're going through and seeing that it's changing them, but it's more so they're so stuck in, you know, that position that they don't really see how to, you know, to evolve from the situation. So I think it's important to remind people that you can look at things that are negative or, you know, not so happy and, you know, become a better person from certain situations. And also in light of International Happy Day, I don't know if everybody's heard, but it's a new holiday that is assigned to March 20th, and I think this year is the first year. So that is happening. Pharrell Williams, he's in the music industry, he's promoting this international happy theme. And I'm sure you guys have heard that. You've heard the song, and of course we all have ideas of happy, but I would say that that's something that I thought of, just being happy and, you know, transforming from things that happen in life. So I appreciate that, and thank you.
Thank you. One last question? Okay. Well, thank you guys so much for coming and listening, and I hope you're able to get something out of it. And you guys have a great evening.